Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Hello and welcome to Movies vs. Capitalism, an anti-capitalist movie podcast. I'm Frank Capello.
And I'm Rivka Rivera. So, Frank, it's good to see you. And I have to tell you something. I am very deep in a current rewatch of Girls.
Whoa.
I'm actually in season 6.
Yeah, so you're almost done.
I'm almost done. It's been a fascinating revisit. There's so much there.
A few questions I have. One, what prompted you to start? Two, how quickly have you been watching it? And three, what's your thoughts?
Yeah.
What's the take?
I think one, what prompted me to start? I really couldn't tell. It was probably switch went off. I'm sure it probably saw some. I think like maybe the fashion currently, like the outfits are very like pulling from that like 2012s, 2013s, and I just was in the mood. Like I was like in the mood. And the second question was, where, how fast? Very fast.
Yeah.
Popcorn, can't stop. And third,
I get it. I've done it. I've been there.
yeah, I mean, I think Lena Dunham's a fucking brilliant writer. I think there's so much about the show that's so fantastic, so brilliant. It's fascinating to watch because it feels so long ago, and the 6th season only stopped in 2017. So like you get into season 6 and I'm like, wait, I know people on this show. Like it's crazy. We have mutual friends who like make guest appearances, but it feels like it was so fucking long ago because it did span like such a specific period of time, and that specific period of time feels like 2 decades ago, 2012 to 2017. And it's also, yeah, it's such a show about like, it really feels like a show of, it touches on so much about like being in your 20s after 2008 crash. Like there's a lot of stuff that speaks to that. And then like, you know, the stuff that like, I'm not saying anything new about the critiques about race, and there's definitely some cringy moments, not as many as like Sex and the City. Yeah, but I just think there's every episode has something but I just think I love the writing. I do.
Wow. Okay.
And I think it's impressive. I mean, Hannah Horvath, the character that Lena Dunham writes for herself, is the most unlikable, fascinating character. Unbelievably unlikable. And I just think like I think it was good for her for fucking writing that. Like, you know, you have almost 50% of male characters are unlikable but get to be leads. And I'm really, you know, and I think it's, yeah. So I'm enjoying it.
Wow, I would be interested to revisit it at this point. I think I watched like the first 3 seasons, and I did appreciate a lot of what you're talking about. I think she really nails like the self-importance of people in their 20s, and the way that the way that you really feel like the world truly revolves around you and your problems. I always had a hard time divorcing the content of the show from the context from which it was made, and I was very early on the Nepo baby train, not meaning that I'm a Nepo baby, but calling out people for Nepo babies. And I remember that, I mean, that was like a huge part of that show's production. It was like, oh, here are all these people who already had successful parents, and here's their arts career, their entertainment career, just sort of not handed to them because, you know, I know Lena Dunham made tiny furniture, but also, you know, we've heard stories about that. Whatever. I don't need to get in all of it, but you're right. It's conflicting because she's very talented. She's very, very talented.
I think what's conflicting is it became the centerpiece for that, and it was no more that than any other show. And I felt like a lot of it, the attention it got, is because there is a lot of like stuff you've never seen, like what she does do for body image. I'm sorry, it's like I could be getting. I'm not like in here to like. Jeremy O'Hara's had like did a Lena Dunham tweet about her writing, and I understand there's a lot of criticism in those things, but I think it's great writing, and I understand the critique, but I also think there's like so many shows that have that same critique and they just never get the ire around it, you know?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Wow, I didn't expect us. We were just going to touch on this for a second. Now we're having we're doing the girls'
I
conversation.
feel like it's always like that, but there's also been you know what else it is there's the reason I started watching is because there's a huge like rewatch movement. Like Gen Z have discovered girls, and there's like I think there is a girls rewatch podcast, like, so it comes up on my For You page a lot.
Interesting.
I would recommend it. I would be interested what your thoughts are. It definitely is. It's shocking how nostalgic it feels when you're like, that was not that long ago.
Yeah, you're like, those were our 20s. We're basically the same cohort. All right, well, maybe I'll watch it and then we can actually do like a proper pod about it. But we did want to talk about one thing real fast. A good thing, some good news for once in this world. You brought this to my attention, although I had read about it, but I guess it's gone through. The Alamo Drafthouse employees here in New York, in Brooklyn, have voted to unionize, which is great. It's awesome. You know us, we love a union. But yeah, did you want to talk a little bit about this? Because you were following this more closely than I was.
Well, for anyone who's never been to an Alamo Drafthouse, there's a few different locations. It's officially a franchise now, but it didn't start as one. I think it started in Texas, right?
Started in Austin, yeah. I remember I remember 15-ish years ago when it first opened, people being like, yo, I went to Austin and there's this movie theater where they fucking bring food to you in your seat and you get to like recline and like there's waiters and it's like, it's so cool. And now it's all over the country.
I mean, it's brilliant. I remember as a kid, that's all I was like, why don't they give you the food that's being done in the movie? That would be so amazing. So they stole my idea. But there's one in Brooklyn. It's where we saw Civil War. There's one in Manhattan. They're in different places. And because there's food being served, it's essentially a restaurant. So the workers there are not only, helping with your tickets and making sure you have a good film watching experience, they're also bringing you food in this really dim light and having to like duck down in front of the people who are watching the movie to bring food and drinks. And it's like a lot of timing too. It's pretty impressive, and it's really intense. It's pretty intense labor.
It's pretty skilled labor in terms of like, serving and concessions and entertainment and all of that are concerned.
Yeah. And because they're essentially getting tipped because it's like serving, they get paid $10 an hour, and then there's tips. And if you're not getting tips, it's $15 an hour. And like all movie theaters, there's been a decline in attendance and ticket sales. I don't have the stat. I don't know exactly when that started, but I'm guessing. But definitely over like the past decade, it's just been declining, right?
Yeah.
Probably with the Netflix, I would assume.
With the advent of the streaming services and a lot of titles going straight VOD, has completely upended the theater going industry.
Yeah. And additionally, so Alamo Drafthouse in 2021 had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy because it was struggling to rebound from, COVID and a whole bunch of things. And so in June, it sold to Altamount Capital Partners with funds managed by affiliates of Fortune Investment Group. That sounds like... It's so
fucking hedge funds.
Yeah, like what a name, Fortune Investment
Asset managers. Group. Yeah, Fortress Investment Group. At least they're upfront about like trying to sound like tough and cool as opposed to like like the World Health Fund, and it's actually just another like toxic asset manager. And
so since that buyout, working conditions have been on a steady decline, and I think this is perfect. Unions Reporting has a really great video clip where they interviewed people who work and are describing some of these working conditions. They're not good. And
they're not good.
No.
Severely understaffed. They're stretching these workers so thin, making them work essentially jobs of 2 or 3 people simultaneously. Especially also this is a restaurant, and so there's like reports of, like gross kitchen conditions, that's what happens when Your restaurant is understaffed. I've worked in restaurants that have been understaffed. The first thing that everyone stops giving a shit about is cleaning properly. It's not a good thing. It's just when you're getting paid shit and you're being overworked, you're like, not only do you not have the time or the energy, it also like builds resentment, and you end up being like, you know what? Fuck this place.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a great point of why people should be invested. If you're looking for like a reason for you to be invested in union and you're not part of that workforce, other than like it should be solidarity, but like it makes the service better. It inherently, unions will make sure that you have a better experience at the theater, because there will be regulations and people will be making hopefully more of a living wage, and like the employees won't be stressed out, or like some of the reports here of like get schedules last minute, not know what the fuck is going on because you have a hedge fund that only gives a fuck about profits. And so one of the things they also pointed out is like Barbenheimer, they were really overjoyed at like, you know, everyone was like, this is bringing people back to the theaters, and we have record high numbers and there's so much money coming in. And the workers at like, particularly at this Brooklyn branch, were being told, we're making so much fucking money. And as a reward for these record sales, they were offered like a Panera Bread sandwich. That was it.
Just like the most fucking insulting thing like you could ever. I mean, I know we have the studies to prove it, but like there's something about like being, I don't know, an executive, being that powerful and that wealthy, that just changes your brain chemistry to the point where you're like, you know what these employees struggling to make ends meet want? They're just gonna want a sandwich from Panera. Like that's what your mind thinks. It's so insulting.
Yeah, because they didn't want to share the wealth at all. Like they're not compelled to do so.
No.
It's not the business they're in.
But as we said, the workers in Brooklyn recently voted overwhelmingly in favor of to unionize, 83 to 29. They got an exact count in there. And then following suit, the workers in Manhattan also won their union election with 65% of the vote. And apparently Alamo's flagship location in Austin is also organizing to form a union as well. So we love to see it.
We love to see it. It's very exciting. I mean, scratch that. It's not exciting. We love to see it.
Yeah, it is exciting. It's exciting that, I mean, I know that like we still have a long way to go to, you know, get back to 1950s level union density in this country, but this is the most that I've ever heard about union activity in my lifetime, and I know that the younger generations are like definitely on this tip, you know? Mm-hmm. Like the kids are like, yo, I was on that union shit like years ago. Like I was there day one. Are you kidding? I heard about this union and I was like, I gotta get me one of those. So it excites me and makes me feel, you know, slightly better in what is usually a morass of shit.
Yes.
Yes.
But we should go to the movies. That actually inspires me to go on.
Yeah. I love the movies. Speaking of
movies. Speaking of,
I don't know if you know this, we host a podcast where we talk about movies. Yeah, let's get to our conversation for today. But before we do, real fast, just want to remind our listeners that we do not sell ads on this show. We donate our ad space to leftist and progressive organizations. Instead, we rely on community support to keep the show going, and you can do that by subscribing to our Patreon.
That's right. For $5 a month, you get access to new bonus episodes, plus our entire back catalog of premium episodes, and we have some good ones. Our Patreon link is in the episode description in your podcast player, or you can find it at mvcpod.com. Also, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on your podcast player so you don't miss new episodes.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're right back with our conversation on Rosemary's Baby with Kate Willett. Hey everyone, we've got an amazing organization we want to tell you about called Anti-Capitalism for Artists.
Anti-Capitalism for Artists is an education-based community dedicated to raising the class consciousness of artists.
Their core offering, the 10-week Intro to Anti-Capitalism course, is designed to be accessible to anyone looking to get familiar with a wide range of anti-capitalist concepts and ideas.
They do this by offering an eclectic array of free virtual and in-person events year-round, geared to meet all manner of knowledge backgrounds. For Frank and I both took the course in different cohorts, and it really was amazing. You get to meet with a group of people who are interested in anti-capitalism, you build solidarity, and it's also a lot of fun.
Yeah, they put together such an amazing, comprehensive reading list from anti-capitalist writers from all different types of tendencies, from Marx to black radicalism to intersectional feminism to queer liberation to modern-day anti-capitalists. So you really get a firm grounding in a diverse and wide array of concepts.
Artists of all kinds, abilities, and professional statuses are welcome to join A4A's community, where they can learn, build community, and co-create their own events and offerings.
You can learn more, reach out, or support their work by donating at anticapitalismforartists.com or find them on Instagram at anticapitalismforartists.
Love you, comrades. Now back to the show.
So today on the pod, we are joined by socialist and feminist comedian, actress, and writer Kate Willett. Kate has appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert and Netflix's Comedy Lineup. She's the author of the Audible original Dirtbag Anthropology and is the co-host of the political comedy podcast Reply Guys. She has also written jokes for your favorite boys, Beavis and Butthead. She's toured with Margaret Cho nationally and internationally and has featured with comedians like Kyle Kinane, Maria Bamford, and Greg Behrendt. Her special Loopholes just came out April 23rd on Prime Video, Apple TV, YouTube, and other platforms. We're very excited to have you on. Welcome, Kate.
Hey.
Hey, hello.
Welcome. I almost said welcome to you guys, but then I was like, I don't have to welcome you. This is your podcast.
You can say whatever you want, it's a free-flowing conversation. Kate, I'm very excited to have you on. I've actually, I've been a fan of yours for a little while. I really, really enjoy your comedy. I really enjoy your appearances, especially on political podcasts. You're one of the very few stand-up comedians that at least I know of that like has a really strong progressive leftist politics that like talks openly about them, which I think is like one incredibly valuable and also so brave. But I mean, I say that like kind of jokingly, but truly, because I think a lot of people, especially in entertainment in Hollywood, share a lot of the same values, but don't speak about them as openly. And Rivka mentioned we both watched your new stand-up special, which I really enjoyed and highly recommend all of our listeners to go check out. It's a very raw, authentic special, which I really, really appreciated. And you weaved all of these jokes about sex and femininity and feminism and womanhood along with politics. So I'd love to know more about like what your experience has been like as a comic, with a more of a leftist politics.
No, I don't really know. I mean, because it's like, I think that we're kind of in an interesting moment right now because, entertainment, like with comedy and really like with musicians, I think are in the same position. Everybody is kind of like, except for, some people that are really famous, like you kind of, it's a little bit DIY, like you get your own people to come to your shows and find your own following through, your work, through multiple channels, social media, so it's a little bit less gatekeepers than it used to be. There's still gatekeepers, but I do think that we're living in a time where, stuff is kind of like, it's less of like a centralized industry. I was thinking about that, the Macklemore song that was really amazing. I thought Heinz Hall.
Yeah.
Like one thing I think he said in there, he's like, I'm not on a label, or like if I was on a label, I'd be dropped today. And I was thinking like when he said that, like, yeah, a lot of artists are kind of like in this situation where it's really, their career isn't necessarily going to be decided by any one person. So I would, I think, like to see more bravery from people at this point, because it's really like, well, what do you even have to lose in the same way? It's not the same thing as 10, 20 years ago, where if you pissed off an executive, your career was totally over. It's a little bit more of the just kind of connecting with your own people. So I would like people to be a little bit braver than they have been, if that makes sense.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Totally.
And I think that's such a great point about the period of transition that we're in right now, where those old ways of being, those old systems are certainly still manifesting, but there is this new thing that's bubbling, be it because of the introduction of new forms of like new mediums, be it also just because I think generations can feel the crisis point coming, and also there's a recognition that those old systems haven't brought in any form of income for like anyone but 10 people for a very long time. So there's value not only for your own ability as an artist to have an independent platform, but also because, yeah, you can then say what you need to say and align with your values as an artist when you're not in this contract, which is actually interesting that we're having this conversation based on the movie we're going to talk about, but you're not in this contract where you owe something to someone because they have promised you fame and money.
Yeah, I'm thinking about I got in my head a little bit about the connections. But yeah, I mean, when you said gaslighting, like the first thing, that is kind of the first thing that came to my mind, like with this movie when I think I first saw it. Should we say what the movie is?
Yeah.
Well,
Let's
get into it.
Yeah, I'm not trying to take over the host of your show. I was just kind of relating this to...
Hey, we have to do this every week. So if you want to like pick up the reins, like feel free. I can send you the outline document. You can read all of the copy. I'm cool with it. No, we'll give a quick background on the movie. We are today discussing the horror psychological thriller classic Rosemary's Baby, released in 1968, written and directed by Roman Polanski, based on the novel by Ira Levin, starring Mia Farrow, John Cassavetes, Ruth Gordon, Sidney Blackmer, Morris Evans, and Ralph Bellamy. The budget for this film was approximately $3.2 million, and it made around $33.4 million at the box office. And a quick synopsis for this film, if you've never seen it, although this will be a spoiler conversation. After moving into the Bramford, a historic and charming New York City apartment building with a dark past, Rosemary Woodhouse and her actor husband, Guy, think they've found their dream home. Little do they know their overly friendly and eccentric neighbors, the Castevets, have sinister plans. As Rosemary becomes pregnant, she starts experiencing strange symptoms and vivid nightmares. Her paranoia grows as she suspects everyone around her, including her husband, might be involved in a dark conspiracy. In a chilling race against time, Rosemary must uncover the truth about her unborn child, only to discover a horrifying reality that her baby is destined to be the son of Satan.
Ooh.
A tale as old as time.
And some historical context for when this film came out, which I think is going to be important to our conversation today. Rosemary's Baby premiered on June 12th, 1968. At this time, America is knee-deep in the Vietnam War, and the U.S. government is just spending hard and fast to support the war effort, fueling inflation. On March 31st, President Lyndon B. Johnson announces that he will not seek re-election, partially because he's been pressured by a lot of the protests. In April, civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated on the 4th at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, sparking nationwide grief and unrest. And 2 months later, on June 5th, Senator Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated in Los Angeles while campaigning for the presidency. Quickly following, the Civil Rights Act of 1968 is passed on April 11th, and later in that year, Richard Nixon won the presidential election on November 5th. On the cultural front, the Motion Pictures Association of America adopted the current film rating system. The Beatles released their iconic White Album, and the Broadway musical Hair is debuting. Also in this year, the first 911 call in the United States was made, and McDonald's introduces the legendary Big Mac. So quite a fucking year. It reading all
shit.
of what happened actually made me feel like there's so much resonance to what's to like the years of now, where we just feel like they're so stuffed, and it's wild to hear how much is going on. But wow, that's 1968 for you.
I don't think I was really thinking about it like in the context of like that election and just how much similarity it bears to now. And, particularly thinking about like the kind of theme of gaslighting, like throughout this whole movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've just been feeling, I don't know about you guys, but for the past like 8 months, I've just been feeling like really kind of constantly gaslit by, these like horrors that we're seeing every day on the internet in Gaza, just this terrible, atrocious thing that our country is doing to other people, and like also being, told all the time by more conventional liberals that I shouldn't have a problem with it because the jobs report is looking good, and I think like I don't want to be too all over the place here, but when you asked me that question about kind of what it's like to be an artist, I was kind of thinking of this movie like in the context of that. There's like her husband who is like the guy that's willing to like sell his soul for his career. He's like literally an actor, right? And so and then she is just more of like a sort of like earnest, vulnerable person, but then ends up, having to kind of be part of this horror, even though it wasn't her decision at all. And like those, to me, feel like those kind of are the two paths for an artist at this particular time.
Yeah, either selling your soul or just getting absolutely corroded by these like horrific forces that surround you, for sure. Yeah, so Kate, you kind of like got onto like the first question we asked is why'd you choose this movie? And it sounds like you were kind of heading there already. But yeah, I also read this as like one of the probably the preeminent film about gaslighting in American cinema. So
well, probably
tell us a
except
little bit
for
about
the
why
actual movie Gaslighting, which I think is where the term comes from. Did you know that, Frank? That there's a movie?
Oh, really?
Yeah, the term comes from a movie called Gaslighting, which would be really fun to cover here.
Whoa, I did not know that.
But maybe
okay.
second, I don't know what the word for after preeminent would be, but second eminently.
Second eminent. But yeah, so Kate, you were saying earlier this is like one of your favorite movies. Why did you want to talk about it today?
I mean, I think this movie gets called a domestic horror, and I think the first time I saw this movie when I was young, I was like, oh, yeah, this is a horror movie about, having to give birth to Satan, But then I watched it again as an adult with more life experience, and I was like, oh no, this is a horror movie about being a woman and, just like the experience of, I mean, I can't believe how little things have changed in some ways, just like all the kind of people, especially the men around her, sort of like conspiring to, get her involved in this plot and kind of like, taking advantage of, her body and not believing her. And it's just like, I mean, the director was a predator, and there's almost something like about that I'm like, does like being a predator like give you insight into like the other side of that in some way? Because he's, I mean, that's an upsetting thought. I'm definitely not out here being like, oh, please watch Art by Predators or something. Not what I'm saying, but like.
But in this case, you're saying maybe being a predator made the art better, is what you're saying, is what we can quote you saying.
Yeah, exactly. Just clip that, put it on the internet.
Right. Cool.
We've got to do what it takes for our craft, right? We've got to do what it takes. But I mean, like, Polanski does seem to have this particular empathy and insight into what it is like to be a woman on, like, just on the other side of that kind of abusive male behavior. And, in the context, too, of a misogynistic society. Like, it's both, because there's, like, the abuse and the gaslighting in her relationship, but then it is also reinforced by the world at large. I'm thinking about, the doctor who, like, she actually finds out, what has been in on the whole thing. But Polanski seemed to understand this dynamic really well, and it's very upsetting that he was clearly like not, when he did what he did, he wasn't acting out of like any kind of ignorance of like not knowing what the impact would be, or knowing like in at least part of himself, like he got it, which is really upsetting in a way.
I'm curious how much of that was in the novel, because I just in doing some very cursory research on IR11, he also wrote the Stepford Wives. So yeah, so like, which is surprising, because I think like both of those, like Rosemary's Baby, Stepford Wives, are both stories considered to have like I don't know, real insight, or maybe not insight is the right word, but captures something about the female experience, like especially a married woman's experience. So yeah, I'm curious how much of this was Polanski, how much of this was on the page in the novel, but you're right. That was what just jumped out to me on because and I should say this was my first time seeing this movie.
Wow.
Yeah, and especially because we're talking about feminist themes. Let's give some credit too to Mia Farrow and her acting. I mean, her acting did so much in this movie. Like, she kind of perfectly captured that vulnerability and
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, because there's a word I'm looking for besides vulnerability. She's so well-intentioned, and she's just really registering, like, she's kind of like, she's blinded in some ways by like her natural ability to see the best in people. And I thought that Mia Farrow did a really good job of playing that.
I totally agree. And I had a similar experience watching where it was hard to not, while thinking about all the themes of the film, have a constant other voice in my head that's tracking the fact that Polanski, as a rapist himself, made this movie, and how do you do that? But I think you're right. I'd be curious to read the screenplay, because I do think that without Farrow, it could easily be a story that, you have an awareness, but you're telling a horror movie, and you could still be telling this horror movie without necessarily all the connective tissue of that you're really telling a story of like patriarchy and the horror of patriarchy and capitalism. You could just tell the actions, write the actions. And she has such mastery of her craft and her emotional, physical being throughout the film that she's really like, without her tracking that internal emotional landscape of Rosemary, you could miss the depth of this story.
I think that's 100% right, and the way she looks too, like her kind of waif-like, kind of like, she's almost like childlike, and
startling.
She's very childlike in, a very like adult woman situation, like being, a wife who is pregnant with her first child, and that kind of contrast, being expected to be like, a child infantilized and also an adult woman, I thought really did something for the telling of the story as well. Because that is, I think even more so at that time, that was kind of the expectation of women and how they were treated.
Definitely. I was curious when the movie started. I was like, how old are the two of them?
Yeah.
And I looked, I did the bio research, and I think Farrow was about 22, 23 when they shot this, and Cassavetes was about 38, 39. So, almost a 20-year difference. And it shows on screen for sure. But you're right in that, like, the casting of her as, like you're saying, this almost like this childlike, diminutive person married to this much older man, it draws the contrast even more strongly between the two of them, especially as she endures everything she does throughout this film. And I was fucking blown away by her performance.
It's really incredible.
It's unbelievable. Like, I'm like, this is maybe like a top 20 film performance of all time.
I think it probably is, yeah.
The range of what she has to do from the beginning. And Kate, I liked what you said about her seeing the best in people, because it's not, it wasn't reading as like a naivete. You're not like, oh, Rosemary, you just don't know what's going on. It's like, no, she's putting her trust into the person that, like, presumably she should have trust in, which is her husband and her doctor. And, like, she is wanting to see the best in people.
Yeah, and it's reasonable for her to trust these people, too. There's no reason to think that you wouldn't be able to trust the person that you married, or, that you wouldn't be able to trust your obstetrician who, it's not... I think you're right that it would be a very different movie if she was like gullible, but she's not gullible. She's very reasonable, I think.
And I think she's desperate
Yeah.
to survive, which kind of comes back to the political reading of it, where it's not spelled out for us. But if you start to consider what is the background of these two young people in this climate, and of course, you would have no idea just watching it, any of that context we gave. But I think it's fascinating that this is a time of unrest for the youth. Like, this is a time of the big divide between generations. And this movie is all about like these two generations. And so I would imagine between Guy and Rosemary, they don't ever talk about their parents, and they both seem to be seeking some kind of parental mentorship. We don't know what happened there, but they're just so ready to be sort of taken advantage of by this old moneyed old generation who needs to birth Satan's baby. But
Yeah.
but it's really, and the other character, it's just interesting that it's also a movie about like these younger generations being preyed on by this older wealthy elite. And just given again the context of what was happening, even though it's not said, I think that's a really interesting resonance.
I mean, when you said that, I was thinking about, I think in the late 60s, I think it was still like a lot of people getting married and settling down, but there were also people who were choosing a more, unconventional lifestyle at that point. And, these are two people who, choose like a very normative path of like settling down young, getting married, having the baby. I'm thinking about, what it means in the sort of like context that, when there are, kind of all these, like hippies and anti-war protesters, like that these are like the normies. He's telling a story about
Or the
people who are
yuppies?
trying to
Are
be
they
normies.
yuppie? Like, would you consider this yuppie?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. Although Guy seems very like I don't know. Maybe this is just Cassavetes' performance, but he just seems like very like working class Italian guy actor from New York.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And Rosemary, the one line that kind of stuck out for me of Mia Farrow's early on is she says, I guess I'm just a country girl at heart, in like a perfect mid-Atlantic standard American dialect. And I was like, that's not how a country girl talks. But other than that, everything was perfect.
Yeah.
But I guess my point is that their material circumstances coming into it is interesting, because if they were any other, it's not fully alluded to, but you do get the sense like and maybe this is me putting on my modern day concerns, but I was like, how is this actor going to pay for this apartment? And
Yeah, I thought about
wife.
that too, and I'm like, was it really cheap back then? Or are they from family money? I don't know.
Of course the devil's looking like that is the perfect circumstance, and that wasn't fully there, but like you did get the sense that things were, how's he gonna do it? In the remake, maybe they pushed that a little more. I don't know.
That's an interesting point. You're making me think about how, like you're saying, they are more like they're a little bit more traditional, especially for this time period and being their age in the late 60s. And it's making me think that, they move into the Bramford and they basically subscribe to this lifestyle of ruling class moneyed interests, which is represented
Yes.
by the Castavets and the rest of the weird people who live at the Bramford. So it's almost like the rot at the core of, everything that those upper classes represent is kind of like they've chosen to go live in this place. So now they are going to be subsumed by this rot. And I mean, especially after you read all that 1968 stuff, I hear people occasionally talking about the end of the 60s and they're like, yo, we didn't know what the fuck was going to happen. We thought the world was going to end. Like, shit was falling apart constantly. Yeah. It was insane.
Yeah, actually, it has, this whole conversation has made me wonder, like, what would it be like to make, like a remake of this movie right now? I'm not recommending that. Like, a lot of remakes are really bad. But I don't know if you would actually have to change that much, like, I mean,
Yeah.
Mia Farrow's performance is unrepeatable. No one should try, but the situation that she finds herself in could be, very similar. And I think even like more kind of like explicitly, just kind of contrasting their experience with what was going on outside, I mean, like, thinking about like all of the horrors, in the outside world, in that year, 1968, like the fact that, Polanski chose to make a movie which was very domestic and, kind of focused on, the place that I imagine a lot of people see as an escape from the horror, an escape from grand scale atrocities. And he is presenting it as like, well, this isn't the escape that you think it is,
Right. And that if they had been any other type of people, it's almost like a critique on being that indecisive. They didn't choose the revolution of their peers. They're still trying to maybe make it in the old context. So they look up to these mentors and think maybe if we can like do what they do. But as a result, they end up, both of them. I mean, I'm curious your thoughts on the end of the movie, but the way I read it was like she just had to give in because she had they had cut her off, but they also seemed kind of cut off from the world around them, like that isolation. They had no community, no way for her to escape this world, where if it had been any other of their peers, like any of the other people at that party, maybe even. I love that party scene because you got a sense that they're getting separated from their generation and they're being pulled into this one. Or she would have taken her life the way her Victoria, the girl at the beginning, did. She didn't make a choice to escape in that way, which I don't know if that was right or wrong, but I thought that was interesting.
I read the end as like her deciding to be a mom to this baby, that like she was gonna like love her maternal instincts. I don't even know, instincts or choice also was, she was going to love this monstrous thing. Should I say thing? It's a baby, but it's Satan.
Honestly, I mean, my take at the end, I was like, well, show me the baby. He could be kind of cute. Like, what are we so horrified by? Like, he's probably very cute. He has this adorable goth crib. Very. I don't know I don't think it meant to have that effect, but I did find myself at the end being like, so what is the satanic plan? Because all we know is it's Satan's baby, and I guess the assumption is I'm supposed to assume Satan's really bad, but like, what if this is not that bad?
Well, and I think that's how she sees it at the end, that she's like, what if this isn't that bad? Like, what if I can love this, even the thing that is, the worst of evil? Like, if I'm here in front of this evil, do I reject it, or do I make a choice to like love it and care for it, Which,
move over, Mary Lou.
Well, just in the context of this whole conversation about, capitalism and war, like we don't really have the option of divorcing ourselves from these things, like it's just like we don't get to move to another planet, even though like Elon Musk and stuff is trying, but like we only have the society that we have, and like it requires us all to be complicit in some pretty extreme evil at this point, so what do we do with that? Like I think she originally makes the choice to opt out, and then I think, decides like, well, maybe I can love this world, and then that's going to come with its own, complicity and probably, participation in the horror. I was like imagining what this baby would grow up to be, and, imagining like Satan's baby. It's probably going to like kill people and stuff. And I don't know what Satan does, like I'm thinking in this context, probably, pretty bad, and like to be, a mother to not just like complicit in the evil, but to be a mother to it and then still feel, love within that context.
Yeah. And the ending didn't surprise me. I didn't know where the ending was going to go. I was like, is she going to stab this baby and kill everyone at this party? Is she going to kill herself? Is there going to be some giant climax? I honestly, what happened was the thing that I least expected, which was, she goes over to the cradle and starts rocking it. And like, we're assuming makes this choice to be this Satan baby mother, which I was like, oh, that makes the most sense. I mean, she's been through so much. She's endured so much psychological abuse, has just been under like the yoke of all of these men. And, that is so sadly something that we see people do in, abusive relationships, which is just give in, because it's the like you're saying, the idea of divorcing yourself from this horrific system, this horrific marriage, whatever it is just it just seems so it's insurmountable at the time. And it was, I think for me, I was like, that's the most affecting ending. This is so tragic that ultimately she capitulated in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, she capitulated in a way. I mean, it's interesting because it feels both. I think that choice at the end to be a mother, it feels both like surrender and also agency. It's the same,
yes.
She has surrendered to this horrible reality that was forced upon her, but she's also making a very active choice to be yeah, I'm gonna be the mom. She could walk out and not be the mom, and it doesn't even seem like they were gonna force that on her. They actually tried to hide it from her, but she wanted to see it. She wanted the full experience, and to be connected to this child, and and love even the monstrosity. So it's, I don't know. It's interesting because it's not it isn't something that she's made to do. It's very much a choice.
And honestly, nature versus nurture. Who knows what happens?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it too, because the way it's portrayed in the film feels very much, I think that's why I first said maternal instincts, because it does feel like something inside her kind of takes over, and she loves, kind of despite what she thought she was going to feel.
I mean, to me, it felt like, and I know the producers and the writers got all this shit from the Catholic Church, but it felt like there was a slight tongue-in-cheek. There was definitely a criticism of Catholicism in there. And to me, at the end,
it's all over this movie.
It's all over the movie. And at the end, there was part of me that was like, well, I was truly like, what the devil, what? I tend to be more on the witchcraft side anyways. So other, the group rape is horrific, and all of the tactics they do, yes, they're bad. But I did feel that there was, in putting the nuns and putting the Catholicism in those nightmares as well, there was this suggestion that the society is sick too. So maybe it was, maybe the baby's going to be just fine. That's why it would be great to get a shot of the baby and it's just a normal fucking baby. And everyone's like, oh,
yeah, just
God.
A cute little guy. I mean, yeah, it is kind of it's sort of a reverse. I don't even know if I want to say reverse, but it is an iteration on the Virgin Mary story.
Yeah.
Yep.
In the story of the Virgin Mary, God impregnates Mary throughout, without her having sex, or I think even knowing in advance. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, God's just oh, you're having the Messiah now, and she agrees to it. And her husband in that story is Joseph. Joseph is way older than her, and he's a pretty upstanding dude, because she's look, I'm pregnant with someone else's baby, but I didn't have sex with anyone else. And he believes her. That's one of the things that's that's kind of the heroism of Joseph, who becomes the dad that raised Jesus. Jesus is Earth dad, as opposed to the sky dad, God. And,
I mean, this is the original Gaslight, right? No.
Yeah, well, I mean,
God
it's God, I think, directly talks to Mary. I think if I'm remembering correctly.
Or is it Gabriel, the archangel?
Oh, yeah. No, it is. You're right. It's told to her by an angel.
She doesn't even get a face-to-face with God.
Yeah, no, I think you're correct. Yeah.
Yeah, God's like, yo, Gabe, go tell this woman that I made her pregnant. He's like, all right.
Yeah, and it's it's interesting because the whole thing with the Virgin Mary story is that she has a baby without having sex. She's never had sex in her life before. That's hence the Virgin Mary. It's supposed to be miraculous. She's about to get married, but they have not consummated that relationship. And in this story, in Rosemary's Baby, I'm actually this is a very obvious point, but I'm just realizing the name. It's it is Mary, but with something else. And,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, that, instead of having, not having sex with anyone. She's actually raped by a group of people. And, instead of having the support of angels during her pregnancy, there's this neighbor who is poisoning her. And it's this kind of like, it's taking what is sacred, that story about like the ultimate sacred, and making it like gnarly and tarnished.
Yeah, I mean, my take was
violent.
That it was taking that story and revealing it for the gaslight that it is. That's intense to say. Clip that and see if I have what people like that. But like, I do think in some ways it's just saying like, yeah, chances are if someone's saying that God or an angel or a spirit impregnated you, there was actually like a much different thing going down in this world. And it probably has something to do with a woman being oppressed.
Yeah, I think you're right, and even in that, the original story of Mary, who is, visited by the archangel Gabriel, as you pointed out, she doesn't have a choice in what happens to her body. This is very much imposed upon her. And in both of these women, it's imposed upon her. Like, it's not something that they, get to be a decision maker in.
And I guess important to note, just the novelist, Levin, was an atheist Jew. My favorite.
Wow.
That makes a lot of sense.
It tracks.
That makes sense too.
Yeah, as someone who was raised Roman Catholic, I did appreciate all of the criticism of the Catholic Church. I am not a big fan, but they do that thing where they do that like conspiracy theorist thing where they're like, the problem's with the church, man. So what we got to do is create Satan's baby. It's like, no, well, maybe we just, maybe just like separation of church and state. Maybe like we reduce the power of the Vatican, blah, blah, blah. But they go, I think, a bridge too far. I mean, was there anything specific about, because there's like several conversations about Catholicism specifically. Did you think that they hit anything like unique, or was it just kind of like table setting to show that, I don't know, that like we're about to do like some dark Satan shit?
That's interesting. That's a good question. I mean, to me, like the thing that really kind of struck me, with regard to the Catholicism is like the ritual. Like there's all these sort of satanic rituals in this movie, and Catholicism, as opposed to Protestant Christianity, it's full of these old rituals, and like as a kid I went to Catholic church, and it's so sterilized. I think in a way it doesn't feel magic, or it doesn't feel supernatural. There's moments where it's like, oh, I feel something spiritual now, but for the most part, like it doesn't have a feeling of like mysticism or awe to it anymore. And whereas like this engagement with like Satan, these like satanic rituals that these people are doing, like it's similar to Catholicism, like in that way, but it also has like that sort of like meaning and magic behind it again, albeit for very dark reasons.
Well, the Tanis root, the necklace that she wears, the Tanis root, that reminded me, and I'm not
the devil's pepper.
I'm not Catholic. Yeah, the devil's pepper, but it reminded me of what I've seen, or like if I was to, what I've seen them carry in procession, it looked a little bit like that to me. My unknowledgeable
like
eye.
the incense ball.
There was something, it just felt, it looked similar in vibe to that. I will say about the Tanis root that she wears around her neck, that to me was also like, I thought it was interesting that obviously when she first got it, she doesn't want to wear it. And we discover why Guy is insistent that she wears it, because he's in on the plot. But it made me think as well about these things that they're given this by this like kind of old money elite who's like worldly and gives her this. And I think what's interesting with the aesthetic of that Tanis root necklace, that even though it's so stinky and we know Guy is pressuring her to wear it, that eventually she does. But I think it says something about how like, well, if the wealthy elite think it's in fashion, like I'll wear it. I'll put, like, there's a trust that comes with them, I think, just by their standing in society and by their money. And that, especially for this young couple, what they represent as having money and stability is like inherently comes with this level of trust. So whereas I don't know if they would as easily be able to take in, you know, a woman who has her own trust fund, or, you know, that they're being preyed upon also for their class and what comes along with that.
Yeah.
But it stands out to me that it's so stinky. She's walking around with a stinky necklace.
Yeah, and there's the other thing too at the beginning of the movie where I think the like knockout pills or whatever, like that eventually like puts her, you know, into the trance. Like she tastes it in the moose. She's like, there's something off about this. I think she calls it the undertaste.
Yeah.
Like there's all these things that
It's a
like
chalky
sort of
undertaste.
yeah, and he's like, oh no, it's fine, it's great, you know, like that gaslighting kind of starts very early on in the movie,
Right, and the girl before her was on this. They took her off the streets. I mean, that's like, talk about prey that they take advantage of, has no connections, no money, and that they know that that's what they can do, and that's who's vulnerable in our society.
Yeah, there were a few harbingers throughout this movie, and I know this is like there was also a lot of stuff in this movie like upon seeing it where I was like, oh, that's where that's from. Oh, that's where that's from. Like in the satanic impregnation rape scene when they're all standing around naked, I was like, oh, that's where Ari Aster ripped that off from for Hereditary. Okay, got it. It's an homage to Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of harbingers in this movie that I was like, I don't know, maybe let's have a second think about that. I mean, like right off the bat, they're like, the Bramford, yeah, all of these people, horrific murders, people eating children, people dying regularly, witches, all of this stuff, and they're like, yeah, we'll let's still go check it out, you know?
Yeah.
And
I liked that part though too, because what that did feel very obvious in a way, you know, like kind of like, ooh, it's gonna be like a spooky horror movie. But what I thought that actually served that is like this kind of fake out to where like you think it's gonna be one kind of horror movie and then it's actually another kind of horror movie. Like the horror is the home. It's not necessarily like, you know, some, you know, violent killer coming from outside, you know?
yeah, or like a haunted house movie or
Totally.
something.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been a horror to be married to that guy in any circumstances. He's
any
the
house.
horror, you know? He's the horror. Like, the world that she lives in is the horror where, like, you know, the doctor is conspiring with her husbands and, you know, nobody believes her when she explains what's going on. Like, it's not really a story like a traditional horror movie. There's an inescapability to it.
I thought one of the most gut punchy moments was when she goes outside of this satanic circle to her old doctor, Dr. Hill, and that motherfucker just calls her husband up. I was like,
Yes.
oh, that
Same.
that's awful. That's so awful. But of course, this fucking man would be like, I'm not going to trust this woman and what she's saying, and I'm going to refer her back to her husband. Yeah, that was tough. That was a tough watch at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, that was one of the most meaningful, like, impactful scenes in the entire movie. And that one was like, in case you didn't get it, this is what the movie's about. You know?
It was
you
terrifying.
don't just have to be in a cult to be like a misogynist. Like misogyny is everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and that's what that's what the medical system still feels like to be a woman. There's so little knowledge about women's health, the thing that creates literal life. It's dominated by men in the field. And I think also just being a human being in the healthcare system, you feel so often like, what's more, like, who are you actually going to listen to? Is it going to be the human being you're treating or the drug companies and, you know, the elders in your field who are all in this system conspiring together to make more money off of prescription drugs? To me, that's what it feels like. And I do think navigating the healthcare system, particularly as a woman, then especially as a woman of color, is like, you can't help but go in feeling paranoid because who the fuck do you trust? And who do you trust inside of Western medicine? Who do you trust? The things that come back. I mean, I had a doctor experience the other day, and you're like, okay, so you're telling me I'm investigating if I have endometriosis, which for anyone who doesn't know, it's like an inflammatory thing they know very little about. Essentially, the feedback I got from the doctor was like, the best we can do is you can pay an exorbitant amount of money to have a surgery to find out if you have it. And while we're inside you and you're having this really expensive surgery, if it's there, we'll take it out. If not, you don't have it. That is the only way in 2024.
Jesus.
For them to know
Oh, yeah.
that Elon Musk is going to space. It's insane.
Yeah, I had a kind of a similar experience semi-recently. I guess it's coming up on a year ago, but I started losing one of my hearing in one of my ears all of a sudden. And it felt like I had water in my ear all the time. Like, you know, when your ear gets really clogged. And I just kept going to all of these doctors, to ENTs. First it was regular doctors, then I went to ENTs, and they would just look at it and they're like, nope, you don't have an ear infection. And then finally I went to a super fancy doctor who was like a super specialist. And I was like very upset by then. I was like, okay, there's this thing happening with my ear. I don't know what's wrong. I just like randomly lost my hearing. And he's like, oh, you're very upset. You have anxiety. Prescribed me Klonopin, which was fun, but I was like, no, this is real. And then he gave me a bunch of tests, finally. And then he was like, oh, we proved it. You have this really rare disease called Meniere's disease. But I was actually thinking about even Rosemary's Baby at that time, because his like first reaction before he got like my test results was just to think that, you know, I was like insane or something like that. And then when he had like the concrete data, like these charts in front of him that were like, oh yeah, he's like, oh yeah, you're talking about something real. And I'm like, yeah, of course I was. You know,
so
like of course I was
sorry.
telling you something real.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I mean,
That's fucking
luckily
awful.
it's not that big of a deal to have as a disease most of the time. I just can't really hear on my left side anymore. But just the difference in how he regarded me as a person once he had like the medical proof that I did have a condition and that I was not just making it up. And it's like, well, what do you think? Why would I just make something like this up? Like, why would I want to spend my time pretending to have a rare ear disease? You know, like, that's such a weird. Why?
And literally the response feels like, well, it's prenatal psychosis, or what does he call it? He's like, it was the prenatal crazies. That was just what was happening.
Yeah, that was just the biggest thing, because it's like I probably went to 5 or 6 doctors before I was able to get diagnosed. In their defense, it was a pretty rare condition, but it's not unheard of. Like, somebody who is an EMT should certainly know what it is. There's multiple thousands of people who have it. It's not like it's not something that's just being discovered right now, let's say, you know. But like, the biggest challenge was honestly just finding somebody who was willing to like do tests for this,
because they're willing to
condition,
even believe
you know?
the patient's
Exactly.
pain,
Yeah.
which is what Rosemary's pain the whole time, and they're just ignoring it. That was torturous.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and I was just thinking about like the cost. Like, I probably spent literally thousands of dollars just not being believed, because I had to just keep going back to different doctors. And I'm like, being a woman cost me literally so much money in this circumstance, because I had to try so hard to like find a doctor who would even take what I was saying seriously.
I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. That's awful. My partner and I are going through health insurance stuff right now, and every time you have to deal with health insurance stuff, it's like, oh, I think that like every CEO of every insurance company and pharmaceutical company and hospital group should just straight up be guillotined. Like, they are, like, those motherfuckers and their lobbying groups are creating so much fucking hardship for so many people in this country. I like, this is like really, like, my partner and I were just talking about this earlier, so it was like very fresh for me. This makes me extremely angry. And then add on to this, like, everything that you're describing about like being a woman going through the American healthcare system. It's just like, it's criminal. All those motherfuckers should be tried at The Hague.
Yeah. And in that sense, we're all Rosemary's Baby, because right now, the fucking option, I mean, we know this is why we have to come together and fight like hell. But in the meantime, the fucking option is like, okay, we gotta go to Dr. Hill. that's the option. I had a vision of us being like,
Yeah.
next time someone does something, being like, okay, Dr. Hill. And then not
Yeah.
getting the reference, and then me saying, watch a movie.
Oh, well, I mean, I was thinking about this, you know, like, obviously this movie is very specific to, like, misogyny, but, you know, just kind of thinking back to the broader theme of gaslighting, I mean, I think that, you know, in terms of, like, every kind of, like, really big problem that we have right now as a society, the thing, you know, that is most pertinent and extreme is the genocide in Gaza, but also, you know, every other, you know, circumstance with people like not having healthcare. Like, there is just this huge obstacle of the people who are suffering, like, making people understand two things. One, that it's happening in the first place, and two, that the people experiencing it are human beings just like everyone else, you know. And there's just like this huge obstacle that we have to overcome with like any problem that, you know, affects like any kind of marginalized group of people, of like literally just, first of all, please believe me that this is happening, and second of all, please believe that this happening to me is not less bad than if it were happening to you, you know. And that feels like the kind of like monstrous disconnect that we're experiencing right now as a society, and it's not gendered like this movie is, but it's pervasive, and it's I think at this moment in time it's very racialized.
Yeah, but you're so right that this
100%.
the same tactics are used, and another one of the tactics used is the book banning and the information banning. Like, Hutch is trying to get Rosemary the information, and then they do everything they can, including Guy takes it and throws away the book to get that information away from her. I mean, hello, TikTok ban, right? Like, they're just like all of the similar tactics, the isolation of trying to just silo Rosemary so she can't be connected to any of her friends who were her only hope in helping her see the reality. But you're so right. Like, the to me, the gaslighting of when she was hearing the baby and they're telling her there's no baby, I think, because I do think sometimes gaslight can be used the wrong way, and you hear people talk about gaslighting in the sense of something different, where you're like, well, that's not necessarily gaslighting, maybe that's being mean, or maybe that's too argumentative. But gaslighting is when you're like, that reality that you're experiencing is not happening. So she's sitting there hearing the baby cry, and they're like, no, baby? What baby? Give us your breast milk. And she's like, what?
Yeah.
Unnerving.
Gaslighting is something I have been thinking about a lot more lately, because, and maybe that's why this movie came to mind subconsciously. I wasn't even like thinking about choosing this, but I do feel like the kind of like perception management on like a social level has changed very much from lying to gaslighting.
Yes.
With like the
Definitely.
Invention and proliferation of social media, because it's like, if you think, I'm old, but I don't know how old you are, but like I remember when they were trying to start the Iraq War, and they're like, there's weapons of mass destruction, and I was like, that's probably not real, but I can't prove it, you know. Like, it was not like they could kind of just lie to us and be like, oh, we have secret intelligence about this, and, you know, like those of us who had our suspicions ended up being, you know, very correct about that. But, you know, they were able to just like straight up lie to us in a way that they can't now, you know. Whereas like with a lot of this stuff happening in Gaza right now, it's like we will see videos of it on our phone, and then I was thinking about the like the flower massacre. We saw them shoot at people, and we saw the IDF shoot at people who were trying to get food, and then like they came out the next day and they were like, oh, it was an accident, we don't know what happened. And it's like, well, I just watched a video of that happening. We all did. And it's like, I think what makes it gaslighting is that they know that we know. Like, they know that those videos are available on the internet. I'm trying to think. I feel like there's been a ton of examples about this. Oh, okay, that they're not like directly targeting civilians, and then we'll see a video of like the most precise like AI strike of all time, you know. And it's like they get that we can tell that they are not telling us the truth. It's like the point is just to make us doubt our own sanity in this way that I find really...
Totally. We don't target aid workers. There's proof they do, all of it.
But like the aid worker one, it was like they targeted them in like 3 separate vehicles. Like they targeted them in one vehicle. The people who were surviving got out, went into a second vehicle, targeted that one, and then did it again in a third vehicle. It was obviously very, very, very on purpose. And like, it's so obvious that I don't even think that the lies that they're telling us serve the function of lying anymore. I know this is starting to get into a little stoner territory, but I think that the purpose is just to kind of like demoralize us.
Yes.
No, I mean, I think this is completely in theme with this movie, and especially, the context of what we're talking about, which is as we've been watching this genocide unfold over the last 8 months. And I mean, sadly, I think the propaganda and the narratives and the manufacturing consent does still work for a large section of the population. I was talking to some family members, I think over Easter, and I brought up a bunch of things. I brought up a bunch of points, a bunch of, events that had happened over the course of this genocide. And the thing I kept hearing from them was like, well, why wouldn't we haven't seen this? Why wouldn't we see this? Like, if what you're describing is so terrible, we would have seen this. No one's talking about this. And I think, if you're a boomer, for sure. If you don't, if you haven't reached out, if you haven't expanded where you get your media and your information from to these more democratized independent sources, it makes a lot of sense that some boomers would be like, well, if CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, Washington Post, and the White House are all saying this one thing, well, then that must be the truth. That must be the narrative that is actually unfolding. And, fortunately for millennials, Gen Z, for younger generations, we are the veil has come down and we're like, oh, no. Actually, we don't have to go through these channels that you all set up specifically so that you could control these narratives. We see, like you're saying, we see these videos. We see this absolute horror that is unfolding. So it's just you can't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining at this point for people who are actually witnessing what's happening.
Yeah, I think Israeli propaganda, Hasbro has employed that tactic for a long time. They'll kind of openly deny something that very obviously did happen, and the goal is to just kind of wait for the media cycle to pass, and then even they often eventually admit what happens, and they'll say that they're investigating. I was thinking about the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh. It was she was shot in broad daylight in a press vest, and they're like, oh yeah, we don't know who shot her. And it was yeah, you do, but I think that, our White House and State Department has been moving to that tactic, a little bit more often. Although I do think that, like you were saying, the straight up lies are working on a lot of people still, but then there's even just stuff I think that the goal is manufacturing consent, but I've been thinking about these protests and how they were talking about them as being basically Charlottesville, that there was just Nazis marching all over the United States. And I'm if we all thought, if anyone really thought that Nazis, giant groups of Nazis, were marching on every college campus across America, we would all be behaving very differently, as we did behave differently when Charlottesville was happening. Our reaction to Charlottesville as a collective was super different than the reaction to these college protests, because they're completely different things, and we all know that. But there was still article after article, being these are the new Nazis, these students are anti-Semitic, they were, doing anti-Semitic hate crimes, and just, they stabbed someone in the eye. Saw the video of the eye stabbing. It's a person walks by someone and accidentally taps them and probably didn't even know that they bumped into somebody. But, it's with that one, the goal does seem to be gaslighting to a degree, because it's like, we all know, like, we just wouldn't be behaving this way if we thought that there were Nazis everywhere. We would be scared.
Yeah.
Especially the mass amount of Jews who are putting their bodies on the line in protest are not going to be out there if there's Nazis. Although Nazis have showed up against them, but not marching with them, marching for the Israelis.
I saw this article today briefly. It was Julia Yaffe, posted like something about how over half of Americans under 35 now think that Donald Trump is the best candidate to fight anti-Semitism. And I'm like, Donald Trump,
Oh my God.
had dinner with Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes, literally, he's like an alt-right influencer. And he openly says, I feel bad even repeating this, but he has called for the murder of Jewish people. He's a real Nazi. He's a real Nazi. And I'm like, that's just insane to be like, oh yeah, Donald Trump is fighting anti-Semitism. It's a completely other kind of gaslighting. And I don't know. It does seem like with something with this, like with this genocide, it requires so much gaslighting, because we can all see it. We all deep down know what's going on. Most of the people in the United States, although they may be racist, where they're like, they don't have like empathy in a normal way to where they would if this was happening to like white American Christian people. Most people in the US are not like into killing a whole group of people. Like, we're not quite at that point as a society yet. I hope we don't get there. I could see it going in that direction. But they have to sell us this through such kind of complicated psychological means, in one way, really demonizing the people who are speaking out about it, saying that anyone upset by this is motivated by like anti-Semitic hate, and to absurd degrees too. Like, it'll be like a Jewish professor that has, devoted their life to, Jewish studies, and they're like, oh, this is an anti-Semite. And it's like, no, clearly this person is not anti-Semitic, and it just requires like just so many psychological games.
And ironically, I feel like in the long term, it'll have the opposite effect, in that it'll end up actually radicalizing more people, especially young people, witnessing what is happening and hearing what our government is telling us and putting the pieces together and saying, oh, I think that's fucking bullshit.
Yeah, I think it has undermined trust in the government hugely, like even today I was watching Anthony Blinken say that like, we don't know what weapons the strike on the Rafah camp, what weapons did it. But it's like, there was a CNN investigation that came out yesterday that said that there were US weapons. He does know. He knows we know. And they're lying. They're lying to the people that are like, that aren't as informed, and they're gaslighting the people that are, that have, looked at the news, I feel the only time I've ever felt like I have felt in the past like 8 months here, honestly, is when I was in an emotionally abusive relationship once. And I don't like necessarily when people like compare like, personal stuff to political stuff. It's totally different. And I'm not trying to diminish in any way the horror and the scale of what we're seeing in Gaza. But I do feel like we are all, each and every one of us, on some level, being emotionally abused by our government right now in a way that is reminiscent even of something like domestic partner violence. Yeah. It's really intense.
Yeah, I so hear that, Kate, and I agree with you. I think that is what is happening. And I think if we're going back to Rosemary's Baby and could learn anything from, like, hopefully we're not going to have our only choice be to go rock the cradle. Hopefully we can reach out to the communities we do have now, which she did not have That's like the hopeful bit I'm gonna take from this horror movie.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think like one of the things that's really a nightmare in this movie is that she doesn't have anybody who is on her side, and it's like, we in the United States as like a community of like left people, we are gonna have like a million liberals telling us all the time like, whatever, this is no big deal, vote for Biden. I'm not saying like do or don't vote for Biden, that's not the point, but there's like most people are either checked out, they're not paying attention to this, or they're trying to like minimize it because Trump is so bad. And I do feel really grateful that like I have people in my life that share my values and are paying attention to what's going on. It's essential, I think.
100%. Yeah, to have community, especially through times of like intense crisis like this, it's so important. Just to for like the emotional support, at the very least, just to not feel like you're going fucking crazy. Which, especially early on in this conflict, it really did feel like, I'm like, am I going crazy? Am I like, I'm hearing everything that I'm seeing, people are telling me that is not what is happening.
Yeah, and now there's more people that are like, oh, this is really bad. Turns out this sucks. And I'm like, yeah, you think? You've been watching this for 8 months, and that's the first time you thought about that? Okay, welcome to the fight, but...
Though I did find it interesting that Rosemary's really only community was her previous landlord.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's totally true, but I think we'll get into it when we give out some awards, because I have some thoughts, and perhaps we'll do that now. So, Kate, our first award is for Best Politics. This goes to the character with the best politics in the movie. And I'll give an example. This is what I was thinking. I actually thought some of the best politics were Rosemary's girlfriends. I know that they didn't make it back past the party, but I was obsessed with the way that they smashed that door on Guy's face in his own apartment. They're like, you are not coming in here. And they saw that she needed to cry it out, and they were like, I can't fucking believe you've been in this much pain. What's going on? Like, why? What? And they were sort of that female presence that were stoking her intuition and being her community there to say, I think it's after that conversation, she's like, I don't want to, she stopped taking the drinks, and she's like, I want to go to Dr. Hill. So I would nominate those ladies.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a really good one. The only other one would be Hutch.
Hutch, yeah.
Like the previous landlord who comes and also recognizes that Rosemary is going through some shit that is not normal, and that these people around her are not, she's not in their best interest. But I think I'd vote for Rosemary's female friends at that party, because you're right, they really act very quickly.
I'll go with that vote too. I guess the only other one I could choose would be baby Satan, but
politics,
I don't really know what his
TBD.
politics are developing to be.
Could go either way.
Yeah.
All right, our next award is, you guessed it, worst politics. Goes to the character with the worst politics in the movie. This could be a crowded field. I think my instinct is, although the Castavets are the ones orchestrating this whole satanic ritual, I think Guy probably has the worst politics, in that he literally sells out his wife to these
fast.
Satanists.
Pretty
fucking
quickly,
fast. All
over
to
one cigar. That's all it took.
Over one cigar and his Broadway debut. Like, my guy, like, it's for the love of the craft. It's not for success. Come on. Yeah, Guy, what a piece of shit. I mean, I also thought John Cassavetes was really well cast. Like, he just plays that perfect, like,
I love John Cassavetes.
I'm just like a fucking guy who doesn't give a shit about you.
I'll go with him too. Yeah, I think he is definitely the obvious choice. I feel like if he had politics to translate it, it would be like a Bill Clinton type person, like somebody who puts on a nice liberal face, but is actually cutting all the welfare in our country and getting rid of the public housing. Yeah.
Yep.
Totally. Also,
and he's like, I'm one of you. I'm an artist.
Yeah.
The biggest red flag that she missed immediately that would have me freaking out was when he showed her calendar and he's like, we're going to make a baby, and he knew her ovulation dates. Like, are you fucking
that
kidding
is
me?
gross.
What guy? No, it took me long enough to figure out in my adult life the difference between ovulation and menstruation, because that's the state of women's health. You think that man knows her ovulation dates? Get out of here. That's some witches sat down and did that with him.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, our last award is Best Supporting Character or Spinoff. This goes to the supporting character that this movie should actually be about, or who you would like to see a movie about.
I'm going to vote for Mrs. Castevet, Ruth Gordon, simply because
Minnie.
I also loved Minnie Castevet. I just, she's in a lot of this movie. She carries a lot of this movie, but as far as like pushing the plot forward, but I thought Ruth Gordon was making some like incredible choices, and I was like, give me the Minnie Castevet prequel. How does she meet this fucking Roman Castevet? How does he get his claws into her? Like, how is she like? When is he like, yo, by the way, my dad used to be this like occultist, and like I kind of believe in Satan. Like, do you want to like roll with me? Like, how did that all transpire?
I think it was the money.
Yeah.
I think it was the money.
Sure.
Yeah.
And at what point did she start doing her blush like that? Shout out to Minnie's makeup artist.
I'm gonna go with Satan. I'm imagining a show called Young Satan, like Young Sheldon, that where we just get to see his precocious childhood as young Satan.
Honestly, this is a great pitch. I think you could sell this.
Maybe this is the thing that'll finally make me rich. I would love it.
Yeah, you just have to sell your soul to Satan, have his baby, and then you can make the show. I think that's great. I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna go with that too. Oh well, I might go with also. I'm curious, like, what happens to baby Satan's politics? Which way? And is there like a push pull? Like, like Dad and Mom, Guy and Rosemary are divorced. He's like spending the weekends with these Satanists. So along the lines of your show, but maybe also on the other end.
Kate, this was a really wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for picking this movie. I'm so glad I got to watch it for the first time. Before we let you go, the last thing we like to do is just ask our guest how you practice your anti-capitalist or leftist values in your day-to-day life. I know you talk a lot about them in your comedy, but is there like anything else, whether it's like a practice you engage in, an organization you work with, that you would like to share?
I feel like DSA has been a really good political home. Sometimes I have, more time to do stuff than other times, but it's like, it's good for me to like, sign up for a canvassing shift. I've been doing some canvassing for, a socialist candidate that's running here in Brooklyn named Claire Valdez. Plan on doing some canvassing for Jamal Bowman, but like to me, or even like I did some phone banking for the uncommitted movement too. That was another good one. But I would just say that like when I'm getting too bummed out, it can feel helpful to just like do something very concrete. It's good to do anyway. It's not like about feelings. It's good to do no matter what. But I do find that helps me.
That's a great one. Yeah, I always recommend people join DSA if they haven't yet. Kate, thank you again. Kate's special Loopholes is available to watch now. Go check it out. We'll make sure to link to it in the episode description. Kate, thank you so much for your time, and have a great show tonight.
Thank you so much.
Kate.
Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And if you want to support this show and get access to our bonus episodes, you can subscribe to our Patreon. That link is in the episode description in your podcast player or at mvcpod.com.
For next week, we'll be watching the 2001 comedy Rat Race.
Thanks, everyone.